The studio buzzed with anticipation. Audience members whispered excitedly, clutching their phones, some already streaming live as the stage lights flickered and the familiar late-night theme music filled the air. Jimmy Kimmel, dressed in his usual dark suit and tie, smiled wide at the camera. "All right, folks," he said into the camera with his trademark sarcasm, "tonight's guest doesn't need an introduction, but I'll give him one anyway because I get paid to talk. He's an Oscar-winning actor, a producer, and still somehow looks better at 60 than I did at 30. Please welcome Brad Pitt." The crowd erupted as Brad walked onto the stage, waving modestly with that signature effortless charm. He wore a soft grey blazer over a black tee, paired with loose-fit jeans. Casual, but somehow still classy. His hair was slightly tousled, and there was a relaxed calm to his walk. As he reached Jimmy, they shook hands, exchanged a quick friendly hug, and Brad settled into the guest chair. "Brad, welcome back," Jimmy said, grinning. "Thanks, Jimmy. Happy to be here," Brad replied, leaning comfortably into the seat, his voice as warm and low as ever. They started off easy. Jimmy teased Brad about his new art collection, joked about how he always manages to star in films that win awards, and even asked about a viral clip of Brad dancing with fans outside. A movie premiere. Brad laughed along, relaxed, sipping from the mug in front of him. "So let's talk about this new film," Jimmy said. "Set in post-war Europe, it's already getting Oscar buzz. People are calling it your most personal work yet." Brad nodded. "Yeah, it's a story I've carried for a long time. It deals with loss, identity, rebuilding yourself from ruins. Felt important, especially now." The tone was thoughtful, deeper than most late-night segments. The audience grew quiet, listening, but then Jimmy shifted gears. "All right," he said, smirking as he shuffled his cue cards. "Let's move on to the stuff people really want to know. You were spotted with a mystery brunette last week, and no, don't try to tell me it was just a friend." The audience chuckled. Brad didn't. He blinked slowly, his expression shifting. Still polite, but more guarded now. "Do you want to talk about the movie, Jimmy?" Brad said calmly. "Or are we doing the tabloid thing tonight?" Jimmy, surprised but undeterred, chuckled awkwardly. "Come on, Brad, it's late night. A little gossip never killed anybody." Brad leaned forward, no longer smiling. "You know, it's funny. I came here thinking we were going to talk about something meaningful, something I worked on for years. But instead, I'm back in the spotlight, not for my craft, but because of who people think I'm dating." The air turned heavy. The audience went quiet. Even the band behind Jimmy froze. Jimmy stammered slightly. "Hey man, no offense, just messing around." Brad nodded once, slowly. "Maybe that's the problem." He sat back, crossing his legs, the silence stretching a little too long for comfort. Something had shifted, and though the cameras were still rolling, it was clear to everyone watching, this was no ordinary interview. The studio remained unusually quiet after Brad's candid response. Jimmy cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the conversation, but the tension lingered like a thick fog. The audience, sensing the shift, watched intently, their excitement now mixed with curiosity and unease. Jimmy leaned forward, forcing a smile. "All right, Brad, let's switch gears. Tell me about your new project. What inspired you to take on this role?" Brad's eyes softened slightly, and the weight on his shoulders seemed to lift a little as he found his footing again. "This film, it's close to my heart because it explores human resilience in the face of tragedy. It's about rebuilding life after everything falls apart. I think we all need that kind of story right now." He paused, looking out toward the audience. "Sometimes we forget that behind all the glitz and glamour, there's a real person who experiences loss and pain just like anyone else." Jimmy nodded, trying to match Brad's seriousness. "That's deep. I guess it's easy to forget when we only see red carpets and magazine covers. Brad smiled, but it was a quieter, more genuine smile this time. Exactly. People see the surface, but they don't see the struggles, the mistakes, the growth. Jimmy glanced down at his notes. I read somewhere that you spent months preparing for this role. You even lived in a remote village to understand your character's experience better. Brad nodded again. Yeah, it was intense but necessary. I wanted to get it right, to honor the story. For a moment, the atmosphere softened. The audience applauded politely, sensing the sincerity in Brad's words. Jimmy's tone changed too, becoming more thoughtful. But Brad, Jimmy began, hesitating a bit, I have to ask, with all the personal investment you put into this, how do you deal with the public's constant focus on your private life? It must get exhausting. Brad looked directly at Jimmy, this time without frustration, more reflective. It's a double-edged sword. The fame can open doors, but it can also trap you in a narrative you didn't write. I try to focus on my work and my family. The rest, well, it's out of my hands. There was a brief silence before Jimmy said, Fair enough. I think the audience appreciates hearing that from you. Just as the interview seemed to regain its rhythm, Brad's phone buzzed subtly in his pocket. He glanced at it discreetly, his expression tightening. Jimmy noticed. Everything okay? Brad shook his head slightly, a shadow crossing his face. Just some things from the past catching up, he said softly. The audience grew curious. Jimmy, sensing the moment, leaned in. Care to share? Brad looked at Jimmy, a mixture of regret and resolve in his eyes. Some chapters don't close as easily as you hope. The conversation hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. It was clear the evening would be anything but ordinary. The studio lights seemed to dim just a bit more as the tension between Brad and Jimmy became palpable. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing that this interview was about to take a sharp turn. Jimmy cleared his throat, trying to maintain his composure. Brad, you mentioned that some chapters don't close easily, Jimmy said cautiously. Are you talking about your past relationships? The media has followed you relentlessly over the years. Brad took a deep breath and looked directly into the camera. Yeah, the media, the rumors, they've been a heavy burden. There's a lot people don't know. I've made mistakes like everyone else, but when your personal life becomes public property, it's hard to find peace. Jimmy nodded, his tone softer now. I get it, but do you think the public sees the real you, or just the headlines? That's the problem, Brad replied. People see the highlights or the scandals, not the person in between, the one who gets up every day and tries to do better. Jimmy glanced at his notes, but decided to speak from the heart. Do you think that's why you've become so guarded in interviews lately? To protect that real you? Brad shrugged slightly, a wry smile touching his lips. Maybe. It's self-preservation. But tonight I wanted to be honest, to remind people I'm more than just a tabloid story. The mood shifted again as Jimmy leaned in, a flicker of respect in his eyes. I admire that. It takes courage to speak out. Suddenly, the mood was interrupted by a stagehand entering the set quietly and whispering something to Jimmy. His face fell. Brad, Jimmy said hesitantly, I've just been told we're running out of time and there's some issue with the schedule. Brad looked surprised but nodded. I understand. Jimmy stood, signaling to the band to play the closing music. The audience applauded, but the energy in the room felt different, less celebratory and more somber. As Brad stood to leave, Jimmy added quietly, Thanks for being real with us tonight. Brad smiled, a mix of gratitude and sadness. Thanks for listening. Backstage, the producers exchanged worried looks. The network executives had made a quick decision. The interview was over. Prematurely. Rumors would swirl. Fans would speculate. But one thing was clear. Brad Pitt had shown a side rarely seen on late-night TV, a side that made everyone rethink the story behind the star. Backstage, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Brad Pitt, usually composed and confident, looked more vulnerable than ever. The crew quietly packed up equipment, trying not to draw attention, while Jimmy sat alone in his dressing room, replaying the interview in his mind. Word of the abrupt ending had already started spreading on social media, with clips of the heated moments going viral within minutes. Fans and critics alike flooded Twitter and Instagram, debating what really happened between Brad and Jimmy. Headlines ranged from "Brad Pitt breaks silence" to "Jimmy Kimmel cuts interview short after clash." Meanwhile, Brad's publicist was on the phone, working frantically to craft a statement. But Brad had other plans. He stepped out of the building, the cool night air hitting his face, and took a deep breath. "This isn't over," he muttered to himself. "If people want the truth, I'll give it to them." The next day, Brad held a surprise press conference. Cameras flashed as reporters crowded around him, eager for answers. He stood at the podium, calm but resolute. "I've spent years hiding behind the stories the media tells," Brad began. "Tonight was different because I chose to be honest. I'm tired of being defined by rumors and scandals. I'm a person who makes mistakes, loves deeply, and works hard at my craft." He paused, looking directly into the sea of cameras. "I want to focus on the work that matters to me, not the gossip that distracts us all."